The year is 483 BC. The once mighty nation of Israel, home to God's chosen people, has been destroyed. The Jews, now a conquered people, desperately cling to their culture, language, heritage, sacred writings and religion. There are people dispersed across the Middle East, several million strong. We're going to glimpse into the lives of those scattered Jews in our 10-part study of Esther. A tiny remnant of Jews, perhaps 70,000, have returned to Judea. Having returned to the land of promise a few decades earlier, after 70 years of Babylonian exile. They've rebuilt their sacred temple, but it's a feeble replica of Solomon's original opulent building. These faithful few Jews living in Judea eke out a living and cling to what is now, by geopolitical standards, an insignificant backwater region in a minor province of a massive new world superpower. This behemoth superpower is the great Medo-Persian Empire, the greatest kingdom the world had ever seen, ranging a colossal 7.5 million square kilometres of dominion. Its territory spanning 3 continents, Europe, Africa and Asia. Today we're embarking on a study series of the book of Esther, one of only 2 books of the Bible named after a woman. What's the other book? Ruth. Also one of only 2 books centred on the lives of Jews in exile. What's that book? What's the other book? Jews in exile. Daniel. God's name is not mentioned once in this book explicitly. Not once. By contrast, the heathen king is mentioned by my count. Who wants to guess how many times he's referenced? Do you think he's mentioned 100 times? 50 times? 20 times? How about 247 times? That's by my count, by name, title, and use of personal pronouns. Let me repeat. God, 0. A heathen pagan king, 247 times. That's peculiar, isn't it? Very strange. Isn't this a book of the Bible? God's not mentioned once. Yet rabbis have long known the name of God, Yahweh, YHWH, Yahweh, is hidden 4 times in coded acrostic format in the Hebrew text. We miss this detail in our English translations. And even in the Hebrew, I'm going to use a big fancy religious sounding word now, the tetragrammaton. That's just a very fancy religious way of saying 4 letters. And it's in fact stolen from the Greek language. It's a composite of the Greek. Tetragrammaton. You hear someone saying that word and you think, oh yeah, that guy thinks he's important. Just means 4 letters, YHWH, Yahweh. Some people say Jehovah. Some people say Jehovah. There's no J sound in the Hebrew. Anyway, God is actually here. He's written in the scripture, but he's hidden. And this is a major theme through Esther, the hiddenness. God's plans hidden in the text. It's there, but if you're not looking closely, you miss it. There are only 167 verses in the book of Esther, and that makes roughly 1.5 references to the king for every verse of Esther. I think this gives a very strong hint as to the geopolitical reasons why the writer doesn't include the name of God. We'll get into that a little bit later. Prayer is not mentioned once in this book. Not once. God's not there. Prayer's not there. What's going on in this book? Yet the pagan rituals are openly spoken about. This book is never directly referred to in any other book of the Bible, New Testament or Old. It's indirectly referenced, but not directly. These details making the book of Esther somewhat enigmatic and peculiar. Martin Luther. We've all heard of Martin Luther, haven't we? Martin Luther, the famous anti-Semite. He didn't like the Jews. And he didn't like the book of Esther. He thought it shouldn't be in the Bible. Luther's hatred of the Jews, no doubt adding to his wrong views on Esther. Esther belongs in the Bible. Many secular historians, hostile to the scriptures, doubt the historicity of this book. They are wrong. They might have fancy letters after their name. They might be Professor such and such and Doctor this. Often the people with the biggest titles know the least. The accounts we're about to investigate are an accurate record of important series of events in Jewish history. Events that Jews to this day remember annually in what they call the festival or feast of Purim. I believe the human author, not certain of this, but my best guess, Mordecai. I think Mordecai was the author of this book. And Josephus also credits authorship to Mordecai. Let's read from Esther chapter 1, verse 1. Now it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus, this was the Ahasuerus who reigned over 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia. Ahasuerus is the potentate of the Persian Empire. Ahasuerus is not actually his name, it's his title. It means Lion King. There's more than one Ahasuerus mentioned in the Bible. And the reputation of these rulers was implicit in their title. They were known for their lion-like ferocity. You didn't mess with these Ahasuerus men. History buffs will be more familiar with his name in Greek. Who reads from the NIV? In the NIV, calls him Xerxes. Xerxes. Or if you've got a New Living Translation, there's a few translations that just say Xerxes. This is the Xerxes the Great. Xerxes the First. I wonder if he gave himself that name. Xerxes the Great. Xerxes the First. He was the son of Darius the Great and the grandson of Cyrus the Great. Lots of greats in this Persian Empire. Cyrus being the king who issued the decree for the Jews to return to their promised land and rebuild their temple. The Bible specifically details that Xerxes ruled over 127 provinces. Some people think numbers in the Bible aren't that important and they just glance over them. Every time I see a number, especially when it's a specific number, I go looking. What's that number all about? That's probably a code. That's how my mind works. That probably means something. Why give this odd specific number? And you Google and you look into your research, all your different programs, and 127 mentioned in the Bible. Comes up one other place. Okay, my attention, you've got my attention. I'm right on it. 127 here and 127 somewhere else. I'm interested. The writer is almost certainly alluding to Genesis 23, the age of Sarah at her death. You're all looking at me as if I'm a bit mad. This is the only time a woman's age at death is mentioned in the Bible. Just this weird number, 127. Abraham in Genesis 23 is mourning for his wife. Sarah's dead, 127 years of age. In Esther 1, we'll also hear of a lost wife. Vashti. And a major theme of Esther is mourning. The narrator adds subtle and sophisticated codes right through this book. And if you're not careful, you'll miss most of those codes and you'll miss a lot of the richness of Esther. Genesis 23 also records how Abraham gains strategic advantage, landholdings, by outsmarting a Hittite clan, and one man in particular, one powerful man in particular. He outsmarts him. He used a mournful time, the death of his 127-year-old wife Sarah, to take first true possession of the land of promise. Just as Esther will outsmart a powerful Gentile man to gain strategic advantage during a bleak and mournful time. Interesting links there, aren't there? The writer is connecting Esther with Sarah, the mother of all Jews. Every Jew comes from Sarah. And he does it in a brilliant coded form, and none of the Persians would know about this. But if you're a really good Jew who study your Bible, the 127 would have jumped out at you, because women aren't, their age isn't mentioned in the Bible, Sarah's was. Each of these 127 provinces had a local ruler or satrap who ruled in their region, but were subject to mighty Xerxes. Verse 2. In those days, when King Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan, the citadel, and that should go in the seashells by the seashore. Yeah. And so I'm going to say Susa. I'm going to use, it's also known as Susa. I'm going to use that pronunciation for the rest of the book rather than get involved in that tongue twister. Verse 3. That in the 3rd year of his reign, he made a feast for all his officials and servants, the powers of Persia and Media, the nobles and the princes of the provinces being before him, when he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom. Notice all the personal pronouns. His. Everywhere. It's all about the king. And the splendour of his excellent majesty for many days, 180 days in all. Newly crowned Xerxes assembles the rulers of each of his provinces in what is modern day Iran. It's in the news today as well. Iran, all the time. Iran. The ruins of Susa are adjacent to the modern city in Iran of Shush, which is from that ancient Shushan. It's the derivative way back into these Bible times here. Xerxes wants to dazzle his officials, display his splendour and majesty. So he puts on a 6-month feast, a massively expensive exercise. 180 days. That's some feast, isn't it? But truth be told, Xerxes had a secret or hidden agenda. Lots of secrets in the book of Esther. He's got a secret agenda. And that agenda isn't actually mentioned in the Bible. You've got to look into history to find his secret agenda. He has plans to expand his empire further into Europe, with a daring military campaign to conquer the troublesome and dangerous lands of the Greeks. He's after you Greeks. Always causing problems. And it was a feat his father had failed to accomplish. He tried to, and the Greeks battered off his father. Now Xerxes wants his satraps and nobles on side with him when he lays out his plans. This party's sinister purpose was to convince his empire that he was capable of such a grand expedition, something his father failed to do. Verse 5, and when these days were completed, the king made a feast. 6 months feasting? Let's have another 7 days. And these 7 days were for all the people who were present in Susa the citadel, from great to small, in the court of the garden of the king's palace. There he is up on screen, Xerxes. I love some of these images for these ancient men. They're still around today. I can almost picture him. I've got AI to draw some nice pictures of him. What's another 7 days of feasting when you've just spent 6 months partying? May as well do another, put it on the credit card, another week-long feast. And in this week-long feast, every man in Susa, great and small, was invited. After all, it's the average man who'll suffer most during Xerxes' invasion of Greece. Verse 6, there were white and blue linen curtains fastened with cords of fine linen, and purple and silver cords, and marble pillars, and the couches were of gold and silver. That'll cost you a bit. I'm not sure how comfortable that sounds. On a mosaic pavement of alabaster, turquoise, and white and black marble. And they served drinks in golden vessels, each vessel being different from the other. So they have coffee at your home and you've got 15 different sorts of cups. That's apparently prestigious. With royal wine in abundance, according to the generosity of the king. Hopefully you've got the picture. We're talking arguably the most outlandish, ostentatious, over-the-top party ever thrown. Incredible. And I think these finer details suggesting the writer of this book was likely an eyewitness to these events. He's jotting them all down. Look at that, 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 look at that. He's going out of his way to tell everyone how wonderful the king is. Look at this wonderful king. It's almost like he's trying to massage the king's ego. Do you think that's what he's trying to do? I think it is. Verse 8, in accordance with the law, the drinking was not compulsory. For so the king had ordered all the officers of his household that they should do according to each man's pleasure. It's good to know the king had some standards. He wouldn't force people to drink against their wills. A lot of corporate settings where the bosses want everyone to get the wine, get the beer. Everyone relax a little bit. Now I think it's up to every believer to determine in your own conscience if it's right or not for you to drink. Now personally, I never drink. It's no big deal. I can't even stand the taste of alcohol, so it's not bragging. I don't like the stuff. I think it's also a choice. I'm not saying you should make that choice. The Bible, it's perfectly fine if you drink, that's fine. The Bible permits that. But if you don't drink, it's a choice that can be a witness to stand out. Why don't you drink? I serve Jesus. It opens the door for an opportunity to talk about God. I've had many conversations with people about God. Some people, as soon as you say, because I love Jesus, they just turn away and walk away. But other people will engage you in that conversation. So it's an interesting way to talk about Jesus, a gospel opportunity. And I think for a believer to choose not to drink, you can certainly avoid many hazards. I've known a few Christians who've really struggled with alcohol. They drink habitually, they get drunk often, and it's quite sad how their Christian walk is really heavily impacted by their alcohol consumption. You have liberty in Christ to choose, but choose wisely, as bad choices have consequences. Have you got your drinking under control? Good. If you haven't, be careful. Verse 9, Queen Vashti also made a feast for the women in the royal palace which belonged, fancy this, to King Ahasuerus. The men-only party has had an open bar for 6 months. And now this 7-day-long party, this feast. Imagine the state of the men with this open bar. They're all sloshed. All the men were enjoying themselves. Why shouldn't the women, thought Vashti. This minor detail also hinting at a culture with a high degree of male-female segregation. Notice again the underlying grovelling in the royal palace, which belonged to the king. The writer of this account wants the king's approval. He doesn't want the bigger message redacted or banned. So right through the 10 chapters, the king is continually praised in a very over-the-top way. According to Hebrew tradition, Vashti is the granddaughter, or perhaps great-granddaughter, of Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar. So a princess brought up in the royal families of Babylon. And by the way, the name Vashti means beautiful one. What a lovely name. And when spoken in Hebrew, this is something I found interesting, the name sounded to a Hebrew audience something like the expression, when drinking. It's interesting given the context of what's happening here. The beautiful one, and the Hebrews hear that name when drinking, while they're drinking. Verse 10. On the seventh day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, sloshed, he commanded, and I love some of these names. This first one, it's like, this first guy sounds like a caveman. Me, human. And a few rappers in here. Biztha, Harbona. This next guy's got to be a rapper. Bigtha, Abagtha, Zitha. And my favourite of all, through the book of Esther, Carcass, the deadly fella. 7 eunuchs who served in the presence of King Ahasuerus to bring Queen Vashti before the king, wearing her royal crown in order to show her beauty to the people and the officials, for she was beautiful to behold. The beautiful one, beautiful to behold. By the end of the week, Xerxes was highly intoxicated, completely plastered. Part of the problem with alcohol is that it impedes sound judgment. The Bible commands to not be drunk with wine, in which is dissipation, but be filled with the Spirit. Christians certainly should never be getting drunk. And if you're a believer and you're finding that you're constantly getting drunk and there's falling into patterns Friday night, you really get that bottle of wine disappears in a hurry. My recommendation, just a recommendation, which you can do with as you please, just give it up. Drunken Xerxes now wants to display his wife, the beautiful one, to his underlings in a lewd and distasteful fashion. He wants to display her like a prized animal. He wants to objectify her. This showing of the queen is totally culturally unacceptable. But the king is loaded with wine. Verse 12. But Queen Vashti refused to come. Oh no. She refused to come at the king's command, brought by his eunuchs. Therefore, the king was furious, and his anger burned within him. You'll find that Xerxes is just like a kettle sitting on a stove. Either really happy or steam pouring out his ears, whistling out his mouth. Vashti was understandably non-compliant. What am I? A hunk of flesh to be displayed for your boasting? Xerxes' anger is also somewhat understandable. He's just spent 6 months and a fortune wining and dining the satraps and nobles of his kingdom, buttering them up for a military campaign. He needed them to be totally compliant. He needed a room full of yes men. And now his own queen was daring to publicly defy his commands. Vashti's refusal was mortifying to Xerxes and endangered his military plans and his standing in the eyes of his nobles. Plus, since he became king, no one had ever dared say no to Xerxes. Herodotus, the Greek historian, wrote about Xerxes' very short fuse and terribly violent temper. According to Herodotus, when bad weather destroyed the pontoon bridge over a body of water that he'd constructed for his army to march across, Xerxes ordered his men, take some whips and go and whip that water 300 times. If this account is accurate, and there's debate about the accuracy of that account, but if it's accurate, you really see the petulance of the king. Verse 12 would seem in keeping with this assessment, the described burning fury which would become central to the latter part of this book. Verse 13, then the king said to the wise men who understood the times, for this was the king's manner toward all who knew law and justice, those closest to him being, another bunch of good names, Karshina, Shetha, Admatha, Tarshish. That's familiar, isn't it? Where did Daniel try to flee to? Tarshish. Meres, Messina and Memucan, 7 princes of Persia and Media who had access to the king's presence and who ranked highest in the kingdom. What shall we do to Queen Vashti according to law because she did not obey the command of King Ahasuerus brought to her by the eunuchs? What are we going to do? Well, Xerxes may be a king with incredible power, but he comes across as very indecisive. Did he really need people to advise him what to do? From this book, it seems to me like Xerxes needed to be constantly advised. He certainly doesn't come across as a very intelligent man to me. We also see that he had 7 eunuch advisors in verse 10, now 7 princely advisors in verse 13. 7 is a critical number in the Bible. It speaks of completeness. You hear some people say 7 speaks of perfection. It's not perfection it speaks of, it's completeness. 7 speaks of completeness. It's a number important to Jews and to Christians. But it also seems it was a number important to the Persians. And Memucan answered before the king and the princes, Queen Vashti has not only wronged the king, but also all the princes and all the people who are in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus. A complete overreaction and exaggeration. Every person in the world is wronged by the queen's righteous refusal to be displayed as a hunk of meat? How silly. But when you see Xerxes' anger about to explode, the wisest thing to do is go along with his indignation. And Memucan seems to be the chief grovelling advisor. For the queen's behaviour will become known to all women, so that they will despise their husbands in their eyes. When they report, King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti to be brought in before him, but she did not come. This very day, the noble ladies of Persia and Media will say to all the king's officials that they have heard of the behaviour of the queen. Thus, there will be excessive contempt and wrath. It's almost comical. The head of the Brains Trust starts to worry about a women's liberation movement. And isn't it funny today, in Iran today, the leaders of Iran, the leaders of these people are worried about the women rising up and taking their sheets off, their, what are they called, their hijabs off. Still worried about the women rising up in the same land today. Next thing you know, our wives will start to show contempt for us, these princes start thinking. You get the feeling that Memucan's wife didn't hold him in high regard. Perhaps poor old Memucan didn't have a very good marriage. And the truth is, you can't legislate to stop people having excessive contempt for a fool. Verse 19, if it pleases the king, let a royal decree go out from him, and let it be recorded in the laws of the Persians and the Medes, so that it will not be altered, that Vashti shall come no more before King Ahasuerus. And let the king give her royal position to another who is better than she, when the king's decree, which he will make, is proclaimed throughout all his empire, for it is great, a little bit more grovelling. All wives will honour their husbands. Memucan's got a hope that his wife might actually like him, both great and small. An important cultural imperative is revealed in these events. As powerful as Xerxes was, once a royal decree was issued, it could not be altered or revoked. This tells us we're in the second kingdom of Daniel 2. This is a link back to Daniel 2, the kingdom of the silver arms and chest. This king has diminished powers compared to the Babylonian head of gold. Remember Nebuchadnezzar? He could say or command as he willed. One day he could say everyone wear red hats or you die, and the next day he could say everyone must wear blue hats or you die. Get rid of your red hat. It didn't matter. He said whatever he wanted, it was law. He'd overrule a previous ruling. It didn't matter. But this king couldn't overrule a previous law. There's diminished powers. It's the silver kingdom now, not the gold kingdom. This fact also, this inability to overrule laws, will become critical to how the book ultimately concludes. Also in verse 20, the first acrostic, Yahweh, YHWH, is coded in the statement, all wives will honour. We don't see the code in English, but if we spoke Hebrew and that was up there in Hebrew, you would see the codes. I'm not sure if it's the first letter of each word or the last letter of each word, but the Yahweh's there. 4 times through this book it's there. Verse 21, and the reply pleased the king and the princes, and the king did according to the word of Memucan. Then he sent letters to all the king's provinces, to each province, in its own script, and to every people in their own language, that each man should be master. The men are always wanting to be the masters, aren't they? The masters in their own house, and speak in the language of his own people. This chapter ends with a demonstration of the small-mindedness of the king. Xerxes shows a surprising lack of individuality and intelligence. And he certainly shows an inclination to overreact. From the evidence before us, this is my suggestion, this is my reading, I don't think Xerxes is the sharpest tool in the shed. And I'll conclude today's message by revealing an important historical detail excluded from the Bible text. Between chapters 1 and 2, several years transpire. And in those several years, Xerxes assembled a massive army and he invaded Greece. Included in this invasion, slaughtered lots of Greeks. Included in this invasion was the famous Battle of Thermopylae, where King Leonidas valiantly led his 300 Spartan warriors against the hordes of Persia. It's interesting, the Bible just doesn't even bother mentioning this event, which was a major event of history. But that's what happened between those two events. And we'll pick up our study of Esther, commencing in chapter 2 in our next study, and I trust God has blessed each of you with our study this morning. Amen.